Would you like a glimpse into heaven? Today, Jeff Olsen gives you that peek. He had a near-death experience after a tragic automobile accident that claimed his wife and youngest son's life. In our conversation, he shares the euphoria of meeting God, the divine messages he received, and the wisdom he gained about what the meaning of life really is. I'm Sherry Nichols with Divine Love TV. Our mission is to inspire and connect you with the knowing that divine love and miracles are real. Now let's welcome Jeff Olsen. Jeff, I want to welcome you and thank you so much for being with us today on Divine Love TV. I mean, after reading your book, Knowing, I am absolutely in awe of all that you have been through physically and emotionally and mentally and spiritually. And what I really would love to do today, Jeff, is to have you share your NDE experience. I find that people are absolutely fascinated with understanding near-death experiences and what is on the other side. Is there something on the other side? And I know that you had a tremendous experience afterwards as well, with the profound learnings and the lessons and the understanding of God and divine love, trust, and unconditional love. So I hope to cover all of that with you today. And let's start with you sharing what you feel comfortable sharing about your NDE experience.
Oh, that's awesome. And Sherry, it's such an honor to be on this show. I'm honored to be with you, and I'm happy to share. And we can dive right into the near-death experience, which in my case, my near-death experience was the result of an automobile accident. That was a single car rollover, but myself, my wife, and our two boys, the whole family, was in the car. And it was a horrible accident. I had the cruise control set at 75 miles an hour, which, that's as fast as I could legally go on the interstate. But there was reports of crosswinds. There was reports of truck driving erratically on the interstate. Maybe the most difficult part of the story almost is that I may have dozed off at the wheel. There's these reports. I don't remember exactly what happened, but what I do remember is I may have just nodded off just for that moment and swerved to the right, overcorrected to the left, and I lost control of the vehicle. Whether that was dozing or the crosswinds, I don't know, but I take full accountability because I was driving. And that's what's so difficult as we get into this story. There's a huge helping of guilt with this, simply because I was the father, I was driving, everybody was counting on me getting him home safe, and we crashed. Single car rollover. They say the car at that speed probably rolled no less than 6 or 8 times. I blacked out for the crash, but when the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious. And the first thing I heard was Spencer, my 7-year-old son. He was my oldest son, but only 7 at the time. He was crying hysterically in the back seat. And as a father, I'm like, I've got to get to my boy. I've got to get to my son. And that's when I realized that I could not move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or the seat. I couldn't tell. There was all the broken glass, the rancid smell of gasoline. I was somewhat disoriented. And I was unaware of my injuries. What actually happened is both of my legs were crushed in the accident. The left leg was eventually amputated above the knee. I had damaged my back. My rib cage was damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My right arm had almost been torn off, and then the seatbelt had cut through and ruptured all my intestines, my midsection, and also raised havoc with one of my hips. I was a mess. That's irrelevant, except that I probably shouldn't be here, but I am. And yet, I was not aware of the injuries. All I knew is my son was crying and I had to get to my son. But that's when I realized that no one else was crying, and that Tamara, my wife, and Griffin, my youngest son, I knew at the scene, I was very conscious and aware right there and there in that moment that they were gone, that they did not make it. They were killed instantly. And that's, that's probably the worst hell a man could be in. I mean, it's like I've got a hysterical 7-year-old. What just happened? Wow, half the family's gone, and I'm driving the car. Darkest moment of my existence to date. And yet that's when the near-death experience happened. So this was at the scene of the accident. I'm aware of what's taken place. I'm in this dark, horrific trauma. And suddenly light came. I mean, like light rushed to me. It felt like light came and surrounded me. And the light felt tangible, like it was literally comforting me in this dark, this moment of despair. There really aren't words to describe what I was experiencing. And suddenly I was fine, like there was no pain. It felt like I was rising above the accident scene. And I was actually wondering, gosh, how could I possibly be okay? Suddenly I could breathe. My lungs weren't collapsing. The pain in my back and legs was no longer there. I was whole. I was okay. And I was literally questioning, how can I be okay? And here's the interesting part of it. In this light, because it felt as if I was held in this light, this holding place, if you will, suddenly Tamara, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, I knew that she was gone. Suddenly she was there in the light with me. And she was absolutely gorgeous. There were no injuries. She was absolutely radiant. But she was emphatic that I come back. You got to go back. You got to go back. You can't be here. And we literally had a conversation about if I stayed with her, our oldest son would be orphaned. And we had a conversation and we made a choice that I was going to come back. I mean, it's an incredible, I probably wouldn't, to make that choice and to be aware of that and then come back into this realm, which that was just the tip of the iceberg as far as the near-death experiences and the things go. But that was right at the scene of the accident, before any narcotics were administered or anything else. So I suppose the accident took the lives of 3 of us. It's just that I got sent back. My friends tease me and say, you got kicked out of heaven by your own wife. She said, get out of here and go back. And I don't mean to make light of that. I can laugh about it now because it's been 25 years and I'm not laughing about the accident. I'm almost nervously laughing about the reality of what happened. I literally had a conversation that was so real that this is the weird, foggy dream. That is crystal clear. And I remember every detail as if it was yesterday.
Jeff, first of all, I think it's wonderful that you can have a little bit of a sense of humor about it now after all this time. The grief that must have been consuming you for so long had to have been immense. And I can't even imagine what that would be like. So, you talk about too, and in your book, Knowing, something that you had mentioned about that communication with Tamara was so interesting to me, in that you said you could literally feel her tears.
Yeah.
And I am in such curiosity about that, because I've never heard anyone talk about actual physical, tangible things happening on the other side. Can you explain that a little bit more?
I'll do my best. And yet you've touched on something very keen for me. And this was my experience. And near-death experiences can be, as diverse as our life experiences, but things felt so physical. It felt as if my senses in this realm, my sight, my sound, touch, taste, all of it, it seemed like it was just multiplied and magnified. Like, here we were having a conversation, and these are just words. Words get in the way. We were communicating, sometimes even without words. I mean, I knew, and it was almost non-verbal communication. We did converse, but it was so powerful, and she was so emotional. I mean, that's the thing in hindsight was so crazy. I was trying to comfort her, and she was the one sending me back. And you know, when I chuckle like that, it's because she's never gone away. I mean, I have remarried, things have gone on, but those that pass are so aware of our lives and sometimes so active in our lives. And when I laugh and say, yeah, she kicked me out of heaven, well, she knew what was happening, but it was a very emotional moment. And I don't know why she knew she was going to stay and why I got to come back, or had to. I would have rather stayed there in all that peace, but it was so physical. I could not only hold her hands, I could taste her tears. I could feel every bit of intelligence from every cell of her being in such a way that it went beyond the physical. And there was more experiences along those lines that we can talk about as we get into it. But I was shocked and even had the question of how, if I'm out of the body, how am I experiencing things in such a physical, sensory way? And it was even magnified.
That is incredible. I've often heard about the experience of things being telepathically transmitted or communicated on the other side. So that, I guess, is what I'm hearing you say as well, that it wasn't necessarily actual words, but that you had this experience of all the senses. And I think that, you know, I'm fascinated by understanding because there's just so much that we don't know. And so it seems to me that what is on the other side of the veil is actually more tangible than what is here.
Yeah, that was my experience. I mean, like I say, this feels like a cloudy, foggy dream. That was crystal clear. Just crystal clarity in all of it, in communication, in what I knew, and it felt like a choice. You know, we had this conversation, and I was coming back, and I learned a lot about choice. I've come to the conclusion that the only cosmic rule is free will and choice. We get to choose. But there was also this higher knowing, like the title of the book. There was this knowing that, yeah, I'm coming back. There was almost as if there was a soul contract remembrance. Here I am looking at the woman that I love more than life. And yet I know I have a little boy in the backseat of that car that's going to be okay. And he was and is. And yet, you know, to make that choice, but it was like my higher self, my inner knowing was, yeah, you're going back and this is the beginning of the journey. And you already decided this. It was almost like I was remembering rather than learning, which I had to chew on for a long time. There was a lot of things within the experience that I just could not make sense of. And yet, in hindsight, and with the things that happened, you know, further things, even peeking into that side of the veil, if you will, that expanded my mind and my heart and my soul, and a lot of them, it's like I saw the sum, but I didn't understand the equation until a lot of processing.
Yeah, well, it would be challenging to wrap your head around all of that once you're back in the physical world, I imagine. When you did make the choice and you came back, I was really found very interesting when you wrote about it in your book, walking down the hallways of the hospital. Can you share a little bit about that and what happened for you?
Oh, I would love to, because this changed me forever. It changed me forever. And here's what you must understand. I have no concept of time in this holding place, this bubble of light, if you will, in this conversation, in this decision. I later found out that people arrived at the scene. Spencer, my 7-year-old, was banged up pretty good, but he was okay. He physically walked away, but he thought the whole family was gone. Tamara and Griffin had both passed. I had to be extricated from the car. And then because of the extent of my injuries, I was life flighted or airlifted to the nearest level 1 trauma center. I have no concept of time. All I knew is I had crashed the car. This horrible thing had happened. I had said the most profound goodbye I would ever say, and we'd made this choice. And that's when I found myself. And we have no idea how powerful our thoughts are. In making the choice, suddenly it's like, boom, suddenly I'm moving about the hospital, a very busy level 1 trauma center. And I'm aware and seeing all the doctors and nurses and patients and the families of the patients. But I was seeing them in such a profound way. Suddenly I was them and they were me. I knew them. I knew their love, their hate, their motivations, their decisions, their fears, their joys. I knew them. And I felt a connection to every person. They were strangers in this realm, but there I felt so connected. And it was coupled with this beautiful, unconditional love. Love without judgments, love without conditions. Everyone from the heroin addict, to the saintly grandmother, which before this experience, I may have placed judgments on. But in this experience, suddenly I was seeing them both and all as absolutely magnificent, as absolutely divine. And I grew up in a conservative Christian home. I did. I mean, as I'm experiencing this thing, thinking, wow, I was so connected. I call it a oneness. There was a oneness. There was a love. The biblical verse came to me, which is the famous verse, "In as much as you've done it unto one of the least of these, you've done it unto me." Something Jesus said in the New Testament, which I used to believe was a nice verse about being nice. But in this experience, I was like, oh, wait a minute. There's a deeper meaning here. He was saying, I am them. I am the man in prison. I am the beggar on the street. I am the stranger. And they were me and I was them. And there was this absolute connected, profound love. And it changed me forever. Judgments and comparisons just went out the window in a heartbeat.
That is profound. Really profound, that experience of oneness. What I'd like to know, Jeff, is were you able to hold on to that?
Yeah, gosh, do I feel it every day like I did then? Not necessarily. There have been moments, though. There have been moments where I have felt it in my everyday life after this event, after all of it. And sometimes it's as simple as looking at somebody, just looking in their eyes and realizing we're not that different. You might have a complete different belief system or a complete different way of living, but somehow when I stop and look, and when I say look, like really look at someone's soul, they say the eyes are the window to the soul. I do. I feel that kind of melt away again and think, you know what? I mean, this happened with a homeless man I encountered, and I realized, had I not had the family love and the support and the health insurance, I mean, the things that I, was privileged to have, I would be the strung out guy on the corner wondering where, if I could get some pocket change. It just seems to unify us in a way where the diversity of our experience doesn't matter. It's the commonality of our emotions. We all know what fear feels like. We all know what love feels like. If we're lucky, we all, our emotions are what connects us universally. And if I lean into that a little bit, rather than letting, judgments take precedent, yeah, it melts away sometimes. I can't say I've kept it alive, but there are days when it's very evident.
Well, when we are living in the human body, we are here on this planet where there's polarity, right? Yeah. There's dark, light, there's so much polarity. And so I think that is something that we all are challenged with in order to grow, right? I think one of the things you talked about, one of the lessons that you had learned along the way, somewhat of a turning point for you, I think you had talked about, that to know that we aren't alone, that Jesus knows what we're going through, that we are this one that you talked about, but also that you came to an understanding of the purpose of why we are here. And that had to do around the growth of the soul. And that it's not to look at life as a test, but to look at it as a gift. And
Yeah.
so I would like you to share a little bit more about that, because, that does seem to be a common thing that a lot of people say is, oh my gosh, why am I being so tested? This is happening and this is happening and I'm sick of it. And I just want it to be over. So what is your take on that now after going through this?
Well, and I was one of those people, I believed that life was a test, and I was failing at it, that God or the divine was going to judge me, and most certainly I was unworthy, in that realm. I mean, I was one of those people, and I had the experience, and I'll be brief about this, but there was a part of my out of body or near death experience which actually happened at the end of my hospital stay, where I went back into those realms, back into that light, back into that comfort. And I had a horrible time in the hospital. You mentioned getting back in the body. Yeah, that was a choice, and that was heavy and hard. And I was in the hospital for almost 6 months. I had 18 surgeries in total, putting me back together, including the amputation and all the stuff with my intestines and everything that was going on. But at the end of my hospital stay, light came again. In fact, I was in bed and I was finally sleeping on my side. They had finally stabilized my abdominal wounds. I had laid so long on my back that I had rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. I was bald, but I was finally able to sleep on my side, and that light came, that beautiful, comforting light. And even with these experiences, I can't express the grief. I mean, the grief, and my little son, who was just a toddler at the time of his death, it just haunted me, what had happened and what had taken place, even though I had had these encounters and these out of body experiences. But this time in the light, I had the opportunity to encounter my little son, my little toddler boy that had passed, and that broke my heart. I mean, I don't know, I mean, those who have had a child pass, I don't know if there's a pain. I don't know that there's a pain in this universe that's as deep as having a child pass. And yet in this experience, when I left my body again and I was there, I encountered him, and I swept him up in my arms and I held him. And here again, it was so physical. I don't, and these are just simple personal things, but I could feel him solid against me. I could feel his heart beating. I could feel his, his lungs expanding. I mean, these things. And I even leaned over and I smelled his hair. And I know that's a very personal, but it was him. I could smell, I don't know if you've smelled a loved one's hair, but it's like, that's my boy. And yet as I held him, I felt this divine presence, this overwhelming, cosmic, powerful, wise presence coming up behind me as I held my boy and wept, thinking I'm really holding him and he's okay. And in my upbringing, as the presence came closer and closer, that was my fear. I thought, wow, that's God. And my little boy's here because I crashed the car. His life was cut so short because I messed up, and the guilt, and this presence is coming closer and closer. And I'm thinking, wow, did I ever fail the test? And here's God to pass judgment for my follies. And yet, as the presence came closer and closer and I'm holding my son, I have the thought, I hope there's some way I can be forgiven. And in simply having that thought, and you talk about, telepathic communication, with that thought, and this almost felt physical too, these divine arms just wrapped around and held me and my son with this Again, this unconditional love that communicated, there is nothing to forgive. Everything's in divine order. And it was interesting because here I am holding my little boy, who to me is perfect and he's divine. He hung the moon. And yet here I have these divine arms holding me, and what is communicated is that I am as beloved. I am as cherished. I am as precious to the divine as my little boy is to me. And it was a very personal experience, but I knew it echoed out to all of humanity. I'm like, not only me, but every single one of us. And that's when I was just, I was sobbing, and that felt so enlightened. And that's when I said, oh, I thought I had failed the test. And that's when the divine God, if you will, this person communicated, a person, being, power, it was communicated to me. Life isn't a test. Life's an absolute gift. And then I had the life review where I'm seeing my life and all the things I placed judgment on. Gosh, why did my big brother pick on me when I was little? And I realized because he loved me, because he wanted his little brother to do it right. And I saw things through a whole new lens based on life is a gift, not a test. And it just filled me with gratitude.
That is so powerful and so profound, Jeff. I hope that everyone listening to this really got that the message that we are all loved no matter what, and the things that we've gone through that we place our perspective on, to really be able to find the beauty in it from God's perspective. Wow, that's beautiful.
I love that. It was interesting as it wrapped up too, because here I was having this experience. I mean, I'm in the arms of God, right? And I'm feeling this intense love. And I got another tutorial on choice. And this was interesting too, because what was communicated to me was I could be mad at the divine for allowing this to happen. And that was a choice. I could be angry at God. It was communicated that I could beat myself up for the rest of my life because I was driving the car. And this beautiful, magnificent being also said, but there's more choices. You could give your son back. You could exercise your free will and hand him over. And that's a choice. Now, in my conservative Christian upbringing, I said, oh, no, God, I thought it was your will be done. And this was interesting. These are the things I had to chew on for a while. As I communicated that, I was told, no, my will is your will. That's how much we love you. Our will has always been that you have free will, that you get to choose. So in this beautiful moment, you get to choose. And in all that peace and all that love and all that beauty, I was able to kiss my little boy and hand him over and exercise my will, my free will to give him to God and know that he's safe and in good hands. And I got to say goodbye. And then, I came to myself, or back in the hospital bed, back to all the injuries, the amputation, and everything that goes with it.
Oh, what an absolutely beautiful experience, Jeff. Thank you for sharing that. It's causing me to remember something else that I read in your book about not asking the why questions, but asking the what and the how. And I would love you to speak to that, because so many of the time when things happen to us, that is the first response, myself included. Why is this happening to me?
Yes.
Why? And that kind of a question doesn't really get you anywhere, but a loop. So what was your learning around this?
Yeah, it was, it was a learning. It took me a while. I thought, why didn't I just hold on to my boy? Why did I make that? Even then you second guess your choices. Yeah. But, the why questions. I can't tell you how I laid in that hospital bed and just said, why me? why both my wife and my son? Why the leg? Why the, why? And there were not answers for me. There were no reasons why. And when I shifted into asking what do I do now? Or what am I learning from this? What is this teaching this? How is this expanding my soul? And those questions were easier for me to answer than the why. The why just hit a brick wall, but wow, what do I do now? Well, okay, you better get well. You've got to raise, your surviving son. How do I expand my soul? Well, maybe you can choose to be grateful rather than be bitter. Maybe you can focus on what you have rather than what you've lost. And that's when the answers begin to come in. But the why questions, why would a 7-year-old lose his mother, his little brother, his father in some ways? I can't answer that one. But what and how, those become tangible action items if we focus on them.
Mm-hmm. And you certainly did turn it around. I have such admiration for you being, I think you said 6 months almost that you were in the hospital, and 18 surgeries, and your leg going through an amputation, and the intestines and the shoulder, and so much physical challenge. And on top of that, the emotional grief and, mentally, spiritually, all of it. What got you through it?
Love. I had this little boy who needed a dad or needed a parent. It was love is the most powerful force in the universe. And I'll tell you, there were moments. There was a time I think I was done, and I was gonna go back to that beautiful place, and it was my mother. Love. I remember her begging me. I was apparently unconscious, so she thought, but I was aware of everything she was saying in my soul. And she had no idea until after I came to and we talked about it. And I said, Ma, you brought me back to myself. And that's love, whether it's the love of a mother or the love of a father for a son or the love of brothers or good friends. Love got me through, and yet it was still one breath to the next. You just had to keep breathing. And I think that's true for all of us. I mean, whatever we're experiencing. I had an interesting, there's this, we say this in the culture I live in, they say, well, this too will pass. You're going through a really rough time, or I've been having back problems, and people would say, well, this too will pass. And we seem to associate that with the hard things, But even during my recovery, there would be a day, where I remember the sunlight coming in the hospital window, and I could hear birds singing. Someone had opened the window. And it was those little things. And now I say to myself, this too shall pass. I can embrace that the tough things are going to move on, but the good things move on too. So embrace them, enjoy them, be aware and present for both the things that we judge good or bad, because it's the duality that lets us know the difference. I wouldn't know health unless I had experienced all that pain, right?
And you bring up a really good point. I think so much of the time when we are experiencing good things, that we don't allow ourselves often to enjoy it because we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, or we're thinking about the other things that aren't going right. And it also reminds me that you were given instruction. I think it was God's message to you. It might have been Tamara's too, but what I'd love you to share what they suggested you choose.
Yeah, you're so good. You're so good, because it was both. It was both. And here's the chronology. I'll give you, I give such long answers to your questions.
Oh, but I love it. I love it.
Yeah, there was a dark night of the soul. I mean, I was home from the hospital. I had to spend time in my brother's home. It'd been almost a year since I'd been back to my own home, because when I was released from the hospital, I had months of home, health care and physical therapy and occupational therapy, and I wasn't well enough. My brother put a hospital bed in a spare room, and Spencer was there with us. And my brothers were so good. But at this point, I was finally home in our house. And, you know, I mean, the emotional, you talk about the physical. I think the physical stuff was a distraction for the emotional. We'd been on a family road trip, and I finally went home to unpack the suitcases, you know, that had sat there untouched. You know, and I'm taking my little boy's shoes. You know, it was just heart wrenching, right? But we got settled, and I was at home, and Spencer, my 7-year-old, who was by this time probably 8, and I couldn't get up the stairs very well because I was still in a wheelchair, you know, and I would give him a hug, and he would go upstairs to his bedroom by himself. And I was just watching him go up the stairs. You know, 8-year-old boy, a child. And the thought hit me, he's never going to remember his mom. And he's never going to remember me as a healthy man. I'm going to be in this wheelchair for a while. I will never be the same. And, you know, he got up into his bedroom, and I heard the door shut, and I just lost it. I just laid on the floor, and I just sobbed, and I was angry, and I was screaming at God. And I don't profess to talk to God every day, but on this occasion, I literally heard, like I heard audibly in my ears, 2 words. And the words were, choose joy. And that seems so strange, perhaps, but it was that voice that I knew from that visit, holding my son and knowing that things were a choice. And so God was the first to tell me, choose joy. The interesting thing where it involves Tamara was, and this was after the accident. I was home, I was working, I was healing. I'd been fit with a prosthetic limb. I was learning to walk. I was back at work. I wasn't dating. I was heartbroken. But Tanya, my current wife, I mentioned I eventually remarried. She came into my life. And it was really interesting because I felt guilty about that. I thought, how can I be having feelings for another woman? I mean, the love of my life has passed away. Anyway, I went to her gravesite, went to my first wife's gravesite, and I was angry. I'm like, how dare you? You left me. I'm here limping around, attempting to raise our son, and you're in that beautiful place. How dare you go? And she came to me. I don't know how else to say. I felt her presence. I felt as if her hands were on my shoulders behind me as I was hunched over, crying and hollering into the grass of her gravesite. And she actually said to me, she said, I loved you enough to leave. And I thought, what? That doesn't make any sense. And she reminded me, she said, look, your soul came to have this experience, and I loved you enough to go that you would get what you came here to have. But don't be mad at me for loving you enough to see it through, to hold up my end of the deal. Of course, I was in the fighting mood, so I said, look, I'm having feelings for another woman. And she laughed at me. She said, of course you are. And she reminded me, she said, look, she said, I'm only as happy as you are. I'm still watching you. I still hurt when you hurt and cry when you cry. And I'm not jealous or upset. In fact, I put Tanya in your path. She's a good woman. You can choose whoever you want, but please choose joy, because you're holding me hostage in your grief and in your pain. And I love you too much to watch you do this to yourself and to our child. She also reminded me that I was a pretty good dad, but I was a lousy mother, and that her little boy deserved a mom. I mean, it's almost like I got permission to pursue this relationship, eventual marriage. And Tanya and I have adopted 2 boys. We've rebuilt a family. But what a beautiful thing to have my first wife come to me and communicate that, and to tell me, choose joy. It's a choice. I want you to move forward. I want you to be happy. And it was pretty incredible.
Absolutely. And what is also fascinating about this is just this knowing that the veil is so thin, and that our loved ones, as they pass, they are still very much alive,
Yes.
is what I'm hearing you say.
Oh, yeah.
Still
I
very
mean,
much alive.
very much alive. And no, not everyone experiences that. I mean, I was extremely lucky, I guess is the word. I don't know. I mean, why did I have the experiences and yet my own son, my 7-year-old child, he didn't have a dream or an experience or a visit. I mean, he was a little boy and he lost everything I lost. I mean, he had lost his mother, his little brother, he had lost his father for all intents and purposes, and he was trying to shoulder all that as a child. And he, I'm just like, well, why do some of us have these things and some of us don't? And once again, we're on the perfect path. We're on the perfect path. In fact, Spencer, who is my hero, he and I just finished a children's book on grief and healing, and it's been so fun to work with him. But he came to me in his early adulthood. He was probably 20, 21 years old. And he was playing in a rock and roll band, and he was in college. He was doing great. But that's when he broke down and said to me, Dad, you talk of these dreams or these visions, these out of body and near-death experiences. He's like, I got nothing. I was a little boy. I was 7. I beat my knuckles bloody on that door you called God, and it never opened. He said, I never saw Mom. I used to beg every day, let me just feel Mom. And he said, I got nothing. So I don't understand where you're coming from. I mean, this, like I said, this huge dichotomy of experience in my own son. And he's like, I don't believe in any of that. I mean, either you're making it up and lying, but I don't know you to be dishonest. He said, or you're deceived in some crazy way. And it was, some type of, chemical brain shutdown in the body that made you believe you were having these experiences. Or he said, if there's some greater power, it doesn't care about me, because I was a little boy and I was screaming out for help and I never got anything. And it broke my heart, Sherry. I was like, what do I do? I remember going home that night, and I pray. I'm a guy that prays. I don't talk as much now. I usually just shut up and listen. But I said to God, look, I'll give it all away. I'll give all these experiences away if you'll give him something. And once again, like I say, I'm touching on the times I hear God speak to me. It's not every day, but this was a profound answer, because as I'm saying, look, I'll give it all away for him to have some type of a mystical or spiritual experience. That beautiful being said, why are you judging your son? Judge not that you be not judged. Why is it you think your experience is better than his? Why would you trade out yours in exchange for, again, a huge lesson in unconditional love? It's like God was speaking to me saying, why are you judging him? Why are you putting conditions on his experience? Why do you think yours is better? Don't you know I've got him? His not having experience is perfect for his soul's expansion. You, but maybe the weaker one, probably needed it, or you would be the guy strung out on the corner. There was this whole almost chastisement of, don't judge your son's experience. Everybody's on a different path, and I love you all. I don't care what it looks like, because it's going to look different simply because you're unique. And it was communicated very clearly to me, your job, Dad, is to love him unconditionally, without conditions. Mm-hmm. And that was a big eye-opener for me.
Oh, huge. And I think for all of us to hear that is such a great reminder. Not, when a lot of times we do look at other people and judge their path and think what's going on, but this is such a great lesson that you're sharing, and message from God, that everybody has their own journey, and it's not for us to say what's right and what's wrong, but
Yeah.
to accept and to let people have their journey. We all are here for soul expansion, and we don't know what somebody else's soul expansion is meant to be.
Right. Yeah, it was. I think it was so interesting that it's my own son. I'm his dad. I'm supposed to be telling him what to do. You know what I mean? We have such an ego
so
in this whole thing, and yet they have their own destiny, and everyone does. And yet Spencer, by the way, he has grown into. He's a magnificent man. He's married. He works with kids. You know, he does music. Therapy, and he's the most compassionate man I know. And it's interesting. He never did break through on this God thing. In fact, he came to me later in life and he said, Dad, he kind of said, I didn't mean to bust your chops about all that, but here's what I've decided. I will be God's love. I will be God's hand. For every kid that's, in his bedroom saying, please, God, help me. He said, maybe I can show up and I can be a safe place for them to trust, for them to learn, and I can give them a hug. And he has literally decided, I will be God's light on this earth, and that's okay. I'm good with that. So he's become an incredible man.
What a special, beautiful soul.
He's a noble man. He got involved with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and they did this after school music stuff, and he had 10-year-olds up on stage banging out Metallica, and I would go to the concerts, and yet I just thought, you know what, he'd say, Dad, that's their therapy. Look at him getting it out. And I'm like, this is fantastic. So yeah, he turned out a lot better than I'll ever be. And it didn't come through spiritual experiences. It came once again with a choice. Mm-hmm. I will be God's hands here, Yeah,
that's beautiful. And what is the name of the book that's coming out that you?
Oh, our new book that Spencer and I collaborated on, it's called Where Are You? But it's written from his 7-year-old perspective of, everything that happened, like, where are you? But it covers not only the pain and the questions and the grief, but it also gets into the journey and the choices and the moments that remind us that we're not alone, and yes, that there is more after all is said and done.
Is it written specifically for a younger age group, or is it for anybody?
It's for anybody. It's really interesting. We wrote it, calling it a children's book, but when the editors and the publicists saw it, they said, "Guys, they said this is a book for everyone. This is just one of those special picture books that doesn't have a lot of words, but it's got a powerful message."
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, Jeff, I also wanted to ask you, because this was another, to me, very important and significant point that you brought to the forefront in your book, knowing you were following your spiritual nudges and following all the promptings, and yet you still were looking outside of yourself for this love, for this validation, and you had a huge awakening around personal unconditional love. Can you share a bit about that?
I would love to, because that's when it finally fell together for me as far as making sense of everything. And that was this. It's interesting. Even my experience where Tamara, my wife who passed, she loved me, Wow, God held me, and I was as precious to God as my own child. Everything was external validation, even if it's being in God's arms. And I think I was continually looking for that exterior validation, hey, just make me feel okay. Just love me enough that I get through the day, And Spencer was catalyst in this too. He is a very wise soul. I think he's older and wiser soul than I am. He just came to walk me through this journey. But it was probably 10 years after the accident that I finally realized that self-love was the only way for me to heal. The validation had to come from within and go out rather than outside coming in. And that's where forgiveness, and that self-forgiveness came, and just realizing that, what, I can only be me if everyone else is taken. Why not just be the best me I know how to do, and that our our individual uniqueness. Even my uniqueness is a gift. Your uniqueness is a gift. We're always trying to be like somebody else or do it like that person. And it's like, no, we each have our own unique vibration in this whole cosmos of beings, and that's a gift. And loving ourselves, forgiving ourselves, and letting the validation come from within is where the healing began for me.
Mm-hmm. Such a significant learning and understanding. One of the number one beliefs that most of us have is that we're not enough.
Yeah.
And as long as we hold that, it's so easy to just look on the outside to really allow ourselves to feel like we are enough, or we keep working to prove that we are, worthy or valuable. But from what I'm gathering from what you've said here, is that, according to God, we don't have to do anything to prove our worth. He loves us no matter what. And to be able to come to a reconciling of that within yourself is huge. And so do you feel like that was the big turning point for you with your life?
That was the big turning point. In my history and culture, that's what was taught. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They do not spin and toil. And yet they're more beautiful than the grandest king, you'll ever know. I mean, these simple little stories, told by a shepherd had immense weight. I was reading the Beatitudes one day, not that we're getting into a biblical, but I still look at my Bible and read it. And
me too.
It was beautiful because I'm reading the Beatitudes, and as a young man, I would read, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And I thought, wow, I want to see God. Now I had the near-death experience. I had now been in the presence of what I know to be God. Now, the funny thing is, in my experience, I didn't dare turn around. I didn't dare look at God because I just, the guilt, the shame, the feeling not enough. You said it. I didn't dare turn around and look, even in all that love. But I was rereading the Beatitudes based on what I experienced. And I don't want to change biblical scripture, but it read differently to me because I read, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God in everything and in everyone." And I thought, wow, somehow that resonates. Maybe that's what was really said. And that's what began to come undone. It's like, wow, to look at another person is to see the face of God. I mean, we're all divine manifestations of that in our beautiful, unique way. And if we could see that and recognize that, we wouldn't be going to war. We wouldn't be killing each other. There wouldn't be hungry people. There wouldn't be marginalized people. There would be unity. There would be oneness. And there would be, there would be truth and passion and abundance for everyone. Mm-hmm. I think we're capable. I really do believe we're capable if we choose it.
I agree wholeheartedly. And so it sounds like that was a huge, deep understanding that you received. So, Jeff, this beautiful divine love that, as you so beautifully put, if we would step into it, if we would lean into it, and then really create that harmony around the world, and it would really eliminate divisiveness and separation, and you're this culture and I'm this, and you're this political party and I'm that, and I don't want to get into any of that, but just all the separation from everything, that this is the answer. This is the key. This is the ability to come into this oneness. Is there anything that you would share that would help people to access that?
Wow, be still. Take 10 minutes and just be still. Just sit and be and listen with, not with your ears, but with your heart, just listen. And here's an interesting thing, because people say to me, well, gosh, how does inspiration come when you say, oh, you heard this voice or you felt this thing? I want to do that. Here's a little test you can do. And this works for anybody. And it's very simple. When you be still, when you get into a place and you're quiet and you're listening with your heart, you might simply ask the question, what can I do for someone else today? And almost inevitably, I'll have an idea, I'll have a thought. Oh, that person at work, their face came into my consciousness. And it might be as simple as, gosh, I got to text mom. I haven't talked to mom for a week. I better just make sure she's doing okay. I mean, when it becomes outward facing, when it's not about, oh, help me, bless me, I need this, I want that, when it becomes about what can I do for someone else today, immediately the inspiration begins. I mean, you'll see in your mind's eye that friend or that family member or that coworker or that stranger. Sometimes that smile to a stranger is the biggest thing we'll do in a day.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Wow, what great advice. It's so true. When you are in a funk, the easiest way to get out of it is when you go do something for somebody else. And so really being outward focused and asking, that in and of itself is so soul expanding when you're not so self-absorbed. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. As a final question here, what would you say is your calling now from having that experience?
Oh, wow. I mean, calling, that's such a big word, but the calling, I have a job, I work, I have all these things I do, but if I had a calling, it would be to show up as unconditional love, maybe for just that one person. I mean, if I could in any small way be a manifestation of the love I felt in my near-death experience, that unconditional accepting love, then that would be what I would want my calling to be. Now, do I do that every day? I don't know. But that's that, I was only asked one question. There was no judgment there. In all my upbringing of judgment and God, there was no judgment. I was only asked one question, and the question was, to what extent or to what degree have you learned to love? And so I suppose that was my assignment. I suppose that was my calling. To what degree have you learned to love? And maybe at this point, I certainly loved other people really, really readily. I certainly forgave other people very easily. It was myself, that I was still critical of and judgmental of and holding back by not loving myself. And the old saying, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, gosh, if I don't love myself, how on earth can I love my neighbor? And that self-love is really key. That self-acceptance is really key to us tapping into that other energetic field that allows us to be our true selves.
Beautiful. So well put. When I think about a truth, coming home to that truth, that's it. When we are whole within ourselves and we are able to experience that peace and that divine connection that you talked about, being still, kind of allowing yourself to come to that centeredness. When you're in that space, it's easy to be able to show up in a way that supports other people, that impacts other people in a positive way. But when we let our, you talk about self with the big S, right? Our spiritual self, when we're being driven by the small s, the worries, the anxieties, the insecurities, the fears, the angers, how can we possibly show up for other people in a way that's helpful and supportive? So
I mean, it's interesting. I've done so many things. I mean, when I came off the near-death experience, I took a whole reframed look at religion. I studied all kinds of different religions. I studied my own. I looked at all kinds of different modalities. I looked into Reiki healing and matrix energetic stuff. I mean, it was a whole new discovery. I found some powerful wisdom in the indigenous spirituality, the Native American traditions. There's a story of a chief, and he brings his grandson to him, and the chief is a sage, and he's going to die soon. And he said, "Grandson, you must know that within me are two wolves, and they're always at war. They're always fighting. One is the wolf of anger, of fear, of ego, of the small s, as you put it. The other is the wolf of love, of love and peace and forgiveness and acceptance. But they're continually fighting." And so as the old sage was sharing with his grandson, the grandson said, "Well, grandfather, which wolf will win?" And the grandfather replied, "The one that I feed." And so, we all have the big S and the small s swimming around within our consciousness. And if we just let that big S, that love, that wolf of love take over and lead with the heart, it'll quiet some of those little s chatterings.
I love it. And again, comes back to choice.
It's always a choice. There's always a choice.
It's always a choice. Which are we going to lean into, and to choose love and trust is what I've also heard you learned more about during this experience.
I did. People will say to me, "Well, how has this affected your faith?
Yeah.
How have your beliefs changed?" I'm like, beliefs are just beliefs.
Yeah.
And my faith, which is it's a loaded word too, but all of that has transformed into absolute trust. Beautiful. I just know that we're in good hands. I trust myself. I'm having this experience for a reason, and I'll utilize it for the highest good of my soul's growth. And if that sprinkles off on other people while we walk this journey together, that's a good thing, right?
Mm-hmm. So always trusting that what's happening is for our highest good.
Yeah.
This has been such an incredible sharing of what is on the other side of that veil. Just lets us all know that divine love and miracles are real. So Jeff, if people want to get in touch with you, how could they go about that?
I'm on social media, and it's my full name. It's Jeffrey, Jeffery, middle initial C, and then Olsen, which is Olsen. So I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all those. You can go to the website, which is Envoy, ENVOY Publishing, envoypublishing.com. And that's the best ways to find me. You can email me there, and I look at those emails. I get them. So.
Great. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being with us. And again, I am so grateful for all that you've shared with us tonight.
And thank you. It's been a pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Divine Love TV. I hope you were blessed by the wisdom Jeff shared with all of us, and the knowing that divine love and miracles are real. Bye now.